beautiful view, but I thought in the interest of a little bit of warmth and also some better sight lines, we close it up for now. So I'm Archie McIntyre. I'm the executive director here at Wright-Locke Farm, and I want to welcome all of you to the first of our speaker series this summer. And I want to welcome Bill and Margot. I'm not sure where Margot is, but Bill and Margot, thank you for joining us, and we're looking forward to your talk tonight. So a lot of new faces in the room. I just want to say a couple of words about Wright-Locke Farm. We are a nonprofit community farm here in Winchester. We're on 20 acres of land that we have preserved with some great efforts from lots of people in the community. And we pride ourselves as being an open and engaged farm. We do three things principally. We grow certified organic vegetables. We do farm-based education for kids and adults alike, and I would put this event into that category. And we also have public and private events. So we have a really great family farm night on Thursday nights in the summertime for the families to come and enjoy the farm, have a picnic, listen to some music. We also do private weddings and parties and the like. So we are a thriving, busy farm 8 months a year. We don't have any heated facilities, so we're limited in that. And you might have seen on your chairs, we have little handouts about our new planned all seasons barn. So here at the farm, we have just adopted a new 5-year strategic plan. And the plan calls for us to continue what we're doing and continue to be an open and engaged community farm, but to do it from perhaps a little bit different perspective. And that is from the perspective of the triple bottom line, which I know most, if not all of you know about that, that our activities will have no negative environmental impact or minimal environmental impact, that will be socially responsible in what we do, but that will be financially strong so that we can do what we do here year in and year out. This farm was started in 1638 and has been farmed continuously since that time by 3 families: the Wrights, 1638 to 1800, the Lockes, 1800 to about 1960, the Hamiltons, 1960 to 2007, and the town of Winchester and the Wright-Locke Farm Conservancy since 2007. So the Wrights were here for about 160 years. The Lockes were here for about 160 years. The Hamiltons only made it 40. Winchester and the Conservancy have now made it past 10. And I would hope that if we can get it straight, we'll be here longer than the Wrights and the Lockes combined. But we have to get it straight. And so that's why we're so pleased to have Bill here tonight to tell us how to get it straight, or offer some advice, if you will. So we're starting to look at everything we do from through the lens of, is it environmentally sustainable? That's not only our growing practices, but also our occupancy practices. We're trying to improve our heating system in our only heated farmhouse, and obviously in the new building. We're exploring solar power generation here at the farm, and it's been actually quite controversial, but nonetheless, I think very instructive. So after a lot of thought, we have concluded that the most appropriate place for solar panels is on this building, our historic 1827 barn, and our squash house, also on the National Register of Historic Places. Both of these buildings are protected by a state preservation restriction, and they are clearly the most optimal sites for solar opportunity here. So we thought about this before. Probably 3 or 4 years ago, we brought this up, and it was clear at that time there wasn't the political will to do that. There wasn't the political will or to put solar panels on a historic building. But nonetheless, with the recent news that we've been receiving, that that opinion is changing. And this fall and winter, we got the unanimous support of our board, 11-member board, voted unanimously to put solar panels on the roofs of our building. The Winchester Historical Commission, whose primary mission is to preserve our historic assets in town, voted unanimously to support our plan to put solar panels on the building. And finally, our select board, which is our top executive board in town, also voted unanimously to support that. With that in hand, we went to the Massachusetts Historical Commission, and we were flatly denied the right to do that. I think we made some good arguments, but they were not persuasive enough. So we've decided that we're not going to give this up, and that while our arguments didn't prevail on their merits, it was time to combine their merits and also political activity and pressure. So our state senator and our state representative, as well the state senator from Arlington and the state senator from Lexington, are petitioning the Secretary of State's office on our behalf to reconsider that decision. So hopefully we will be in a position to put solar on this building and start approaching a more environmentally responsible way of doing business here at the farm. So I could talk forever, but I feel like I've talked way too long already. But I just wanted to give you kind of the flavor for what we do. I would just ask if anyone in the audience has thoughts or ideas about the farm and how we could enhance our sustainability efforts. I am open to all comers, so please seek me out with any ideas or thoughts that you might have for us. So with that, I'd like to introduce Kim Nealon, who is our community engagement manager, who is responsible for our speaker series and all of the outreach we do in the community, to say a few words and introduce Bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Archie, and welcome everybody to this evening. It is awesome to see such a full barn. This is so exciting. Curious, just to kind of jump off of Archie's, what he was talking about, curious to see where people are coming from, and if you've been to the barn before. Hello. Do you want to go outside? Come on.
And for my second trip.
Now I shall pull a rabbit out of my... back to my question. Who's been to the speaker series before? Great, awesome, good chunk of hands. Who has been to the farm before, but maybe not the speaker series? Excellent. And who has never been here before? Is this the first time? Awesome. Well, welcome to Wright-Locke Farm. We're so pleased to have you here. We're in a very special place. I mean, who could say that they're going to, have heard a world-renowned climate expert in a barn built in 1827 that still smells slightly of horses and cows? It's not too shabby for a Wednesday night. So as Archie was saying, here at the farm, we strive to educate, nourish, to sustain and connect our community here with the many things that we do, from our programming to people getting involved by volunteering, coming to lectures, their kids jumping in on some of our youth programs. There's a lot of stuff to do here for everybody if it's just participating in the farm stand or our CSA. So the speaker series was kind of one of the newest programs that we started. We're in our third year now. It's been so cool to see how it's grown, and it's really been an awesome program to see, to really kind of expand our thinking. We wanted to create more conversation and action based from this little farm, and how could we do that? And the speaker series was kind of one of our first forays into this realm of just spreading knowledge and getting people thinking about really important ideas. So it's been amazing to kind of see the shift shifts in our thinking and, how can we be as impactful as we can. So I did want to take this time to just let you know about an exciting new announcement for our fundraising campaign for that new building that we are hoping to build. But a generous donor has come forth to offer up offer to match $75,000 towards the sustainable features that we are working to design for that building. And so until June 21st, we are offering this match challenge to make the All Seasons Barn green. So I implore you to bring the pamphlet that you may be sitting on, or take it home. Yes, Nina's got it. Take it home, maybe recycle it if it's not for you at this point in time, but if you do have the capacity, your donation will mean double up until June 21st. So yeah, if you like this programming and you really want to see more of it, you want to see more people enjoy this all year round, I really encourage you to make a contribution. But enough of that, and let's get to what you're really excited for this evening. Our speaker. Dr. William Moomaw is Emeritus Professor of International Environmental Policy and founding director of the Center for International Environment and Resource Policy at the Fletcher School at Tufts. I need the paper because there are so many great words and so many accolades in here that I'm definitely, and there's so much that I didn't put in this that we're just excited to have him. But he currently serves as the co-director of the Global Development and Environment Institute at Tufts, which he co-founded. After serving as the American Association for the Advancement of Science Fellow in the United States Senate, he began working on climate change in 1988 as the first director of the climate program at World Resources Institute in Washington. He has been a lead author of 5 international Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports, the IPCC, and which shared the Nobel Peace Prize for its climate work in 2007. He chairs the board of directors of 2 climate science and policy organizations, the Climate Group North America, Woods Hole Research Center is the other one. He also serves on the boards of the Nature Conservancy of Massachusetts, the Consensus Building Institute, Earthwatch Institute, and is on the national advisory boards of the Union of Concerned Scientists and Young Voices for the Planet. And kind of on a side note, Dr. Moomaw and his wife Margot were also able to complete a zero net energy home in Williamstown in 2007. So that's, again, spectacular. And, there's so much more that I could be saying, but we are just so fortunate to have Bill here tonight, and I welcome you to join me in welcoming him to the barn stage.
Thank you. I'm very, very pleased and honored to be asked to give the lead-off presentation this year. My friend and colleague at Tufts, Tim Griffin, is on the board here, which I think may have something to do with how I got invited. I don't know, but I have to talk to that lad. He needs to be careful who he recommends to do various things. I'm going to be talking about climate change, but also about biodiversity and the sustainability of the planet more generally. And if you have questions, we're going to have a question and answer period at the end, but also if you have questions in the middle, if I say something that just doesn't make any sense, raise your hand and we'll try to take care of it quickly so that everybody is going along. Now the title clearly is about solutions. And that's what I've worked on climate change. The whole 31 years I've been working on climate change is on the solution side. There are enough other people, other scientists who are working on what is the problem and how serious is it. We have to understand that. So there will be a little bit of bad news at the beginning, but then from then on, it'll be all about some solutions. So the themes throughout will be learning from nature. We all know that climate change is being caused by the gases we're putting in the atmosphere, and we have to stop doing that. I was delighted to hear that the farm is trying to get solar panels on its roof, and that they will be doing something that other historic organizations have done, like Hancock Shaker Village out in the western part of the state has a huge solar array. I think the Shakers would have loved solar power. They loved light, you know, and light had special spiritual significance for them. So the way they did windows and everything was to bring in light. So I think this would be a natural for the Shakers, and I think it should be a natural for here too. So nature is the ultimate sustainable system. It's been functioning for millions of years, and seems to be doing pretty well despite our best attempts to the contrary. So, oops, sorry, I pushed the wrong button here. By the way, so we're now disrupting the climate and the planet, the life on the planet. And so there's a question, how to support the use of practices observed within natural systems to create sustainable forests, wetlands, and agriculture. We all know we have to stop our use of fossil fuels. I'm just putting that up as a given. I'm not going to talk any more about it. Everybody understands that. And but the thing that we have newly learned is that's not going to be enough. We have to actively start removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and the only systems we have for doing that are forests, wetlands, and agricultural soils. These pictures here are from the dioramas at Harvard Forest. If you've ever been out there, they've got about 20 of these, and just shows what's happened to the forest in New England from the time of early settlement. And you can see, you know, this is what it used to look like. Then by the 1800s, it started to look like this, and finally, after 1850, it looked like that. Imagine that. The small number of people without any chainsaws, without any machines, no bulldozers, axes, saws, oxen, managed to clear 80% of the forests of New England. Cut down 80% of the trees. That's just, to me, an astounding accomplishment. Well, last October, you probably heard about this report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which basically said that to keep the temperatures from rising excessively, global net anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions must decline by about 45% from 2010 levels by 2030 and be no greater than what nature can take out by 2050. That is a tall order. We aren't even close. And needless to say, at the national level, we have a government which is trying to undo anything that was done before and to prevent doing anything else. So we have to simultaneously reduce our combustion emissions and remove more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And I'm not going to talk about the other greenhouse gases. About a quarter to a third is from other things. Methane from cattle and things, methane leaks from our natural gas pipelines, certain industrial chemicals and so forth. But I won't talk about that. I'll talk just about the carbon part because that's the one that we have an opportunity to really do something about. So what is carbon and why is it important? I won't give you the whole chemistry lesson here, but you know, carbon is just an element. It's an atom, and it forms it's the structure of putting carbon atoms together. Think of it like Lego blocks, just sticking them all together to make the backbones of just about every living thing. It's the structure of our proteins. It's the structure of our muscle tissues. It's the structure of wood. It's the structure of all plant material. And so it's absolutely essential. And it's a large part of fossil fuels. That's why, and then it's about half, if you take half the weight of dry wood, this wood here, it would be carbon, right? So, when wood or fossil fuels are burned, the carbon is converted to carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is a gas which does occur naturally in the atmosphere, but we have added a great deal, as we'll see in a moment, by our discovery that we could take ancient plants that were turned into coal and oil and natural gas and turn them into heat, and then that can be used to make electricity, run our cars, do all kinds of wonderful things. And so the sun warms the earth, and these gases, like carbon dioxide, are in the atmosphere, and they trap that heat and prevent it from going back into space. If at the time it's been called the greenhouse effect, But that's because it was discovered in 1827. If it had been discovered in 1927, it would have been called the hot car effect, right? We've all experienced the hot car effect. You know, you go out on a day, it's 70 degrees, the sun is shining, you get in the car, and it's 110. How does this happen? Well, because glass lets the solar energy in, it's absorbed by the seats and everything, and then it is turned into radiant heat. That radiant heat tries to escape. Glass is opaque to infrared radiation. So basically, that's exactly what the carbon dioxide is like, the windows in your car, keeping the heat in. So this has warmed over since we started using fossil fuels. Well, we'll say at the start of the Industrial Revolution, 1750, but it really isn't until 1850 that it really gets going. Just about the time we deforested all of New England. I hadn't thought of that coincidence until just now. So this has increased the Earth's temperatures by about 2 degrees Fahrenheit, which does not sound like a lot. But at the depth of the last ice age, the world was maybe something like 10 degrees colder than it is now. Or well, I guess you have to add 2 degrees now, 12 degrees colder than it is now. So 12 degrees makes a difference between being under a mile of ice here and today, okay? So very small temperature changes make a huge difference. So shortly after the IPCC report came out, a 5-year effort of all the federal agencies, which is mandated by Congress, is to come out with the National Climate Assessment. And they've come out with 2 volumes. It's the second one that came out in November. And it says the impacts of climate change are already being felt in communities across the country. More frequent and intense extreme weather and climate-related events are expected to damage infrastructure, ecosystems, and social systems. A lot of the migration we're seeing in the world, whether it's from Central America to here, or from the Middle East and Africa to Europe, is related to the changes in the climate that have decimated the agricultural systems of those parts of the world, and those people have no place to go. So, in the Northeast, these are the things we've seen. More intense downpours. Imagine that. Anybody notice that it seems to rain harder than it used to? It even snows harder than it used to, because snow is just rain that happens to fall when the temperature is below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, right? I mean, it's so when people say, oh, we got a big snowfall, where's global warming? Well, if it were 2 degrees warmer than that on that particular day, it would have been rain. It just depends on what the temperature is. So extended droughts produce crop failures, high winds blow down trees. Margot and I just took a hike yesterday out in the Berkshires, and there are a lot of big trees that have come down in recent years. Just these dereches, these incredibly intense wind events, these drops that occur and pressure that occur, and big trees go over pretty quickly. Along the coast, salt water is intruding into the soils and the aquifers along the coasts. As the sea level rises, erratic weather damages crops. You know, crops don't like to have it hot one day, cold the next, soaking wet, then very terribly dry. They need something that's a little more constant than that. Extreme heat decreases yields. We're already seeing decreased yields of some of the major crops like rice. You know, fully almost half the world's population, that's their staple food is rice. And the productivity of rice has been dropping because the nights are so warm, the plants keep metabolizing and using up the rice grain that they had built up during the day with photosynthesis. So the yields are going down. We're getting to see it with corn and with other crops as well. And then, don't think about this much, but can you imagine being a farmer in India last year when it got to be 127 degrees Fahrenheit? You can't work, no human being can work in that kind of condition for more than a very short period of time. So here is just showing, you're wondering about, this is from that report. This is the percentage change in the amount of rain falling in the top 1% of precipitation events. So out of every 100 events, this is the one that had the most. How much rain came down? And you can see going back to 1900 that between 2000 and 2010, it's a 50% increase. In other words, there's more rain in that top event by half than there was in 1900. It's a pretty big change. That's what we mean by a changed climate. The climate has changed, the conditions have changed, therefore weather patterns are changed. And this just appeared on my screen this morning. The National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration found, after analyzing the data, that the last 12 months, from May of 2018 through April 2019, is the wettest 12-month stretch on record for the United States. What is, you know, the number of dreary days we've had have been pretty legion in this past few years. And this past year, I've just felt was the dreariest I've ever experienced. And it wasn't just my imagination. You can afford to be miserable because now it's proven by the statistics. It's like looking at the thermometer and saying, okay, it's okay that I feel cold today because it's only 20 degrees outside. I mean, you know, it's one of those kind of funny things, but it's important to know that. And look at this.
Yeah.
So what does that say there?
That's record wettest area here, most of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And the Berkshires, we got off a little lighter because we're just much above average. But look at this. This is really incredible. These are unchanged, the white ones, and these are drier. Imagine Washington and Oregon being drier than they have been in the past. Yeah. We're getting it all. And of course, I'm sorry. It's this one. Then another bit of bad news. Earlier this month, this organization with the impossible name, the International Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, they really need to talk to their marketing people about the titles of these things. Actually, it's headed up by Bob Watson, who is actually Sir Robert Watson now, who was the head of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that I served on with him for several rounds. And he's an amazing person of getting hundreds of scientists to work together. That's already amazing. And to get them to work together on something as complex as climate change, or in this case, on biodiversity and ecosystems. So we got hundreds of scientists together. They read 15,000 research articles from the past 10 years or so. That in itself is a mind-numbing thought for anyone who has ever read scientific articles. And here's what they came up with. Nature and its vital contributions to people, which together embody biodiversity, meaning the diversity of species, and ecosystem functions and services, are deteriorating worldwide. No big surprise there, but once again, it's now fully documented. It isn't just your imagination. Nature is essential for human existence and good quality of life. Most of nature's contributions to people are not fully replaceable, and some are irreplaceable. Take a deep breath. 1/4 of that oxygen came from the forests. Half of it came from the oceans. The other 1/4 came from all the other plants on the planet. This is something we didn't pay for. It's something that we can only destroy. It's just an important ecosystem service. That's what an ecosystem service is. It's a service provided by the natural world that we use. And there have been attempts to try to monetize this. How much is this worth? Well, you know, think about the space station. How much does it cost to keep 6 people alive up there? How much oxygen do they have to ship up there? How much water? How much technology just to keep 6 people alive when you don't have natural ecosystems serving them? So, and finally, this is pretty. There are 2 more here. 75% of the land surface is significantly altered. 66% of the ocean area is experiencing increasing impacts, and over 85% of wetlands in area have been lost on the planet. We actually have an expert on wetlands here. I had no idea it was that bad, and I've been working on wetlands for about the last 5 or 6 years. I knew it was bad. That's worse than I actually thought. And this was the numbing news. Around 1 million species are threatened with extinction. So this is the bad news part of the story. But Now we'll start the good news part. Nature holds the solutions, I think. Certainly we need our technology, and we need all of it that we can muster in order to make this work. So whatever it is, whatever way we can heat our homes that doesn't put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, transport ourselves, transport our goods, everything that we can do that stops burning coal, oil, or natural gas, or wood, would be an improvement. That will help us. Because wood puts out as much carbon dioxide, puts out more than coal does for the amount of heat that's generated. That's a sobering thought. Since in New England, we all love our wood fires, hearth and home, all that good stuff. But that's not where the real danger is. The real danger is the commercialization of that. We'll talk about that in a little while. So 1/3 of the atmosphere, when I saw this figure, it was in an IPCC report a few years back. 1/3 of the carbon dioxide added to the atmosphere since 1750 comes from deforestation, wetland destruction, and land degradation. Well, I thought, if it came from there, could we maybe put some of it back, right? A lot of other people have been coming to the same conclusion. Look, this isn't something, I mean, if 1/3 of it came from these sources, that means those sources are now, those places are now deficient in the carbon they stored before. And indeed, even today, 1/3, an amount equal to 1/3 of what we emit every year is removed from the atmosphere by natural systems on land. So that's great. This next one starts out sounding like bad news, but it's really good news. Terrestrial ecosystems, meaning forests and grasslands and soils and so forth, could remove twice as much carbon dioxide annually as they are now doing. We are managing them in a way that keeps them from absorbing more. Well, that's fixable, I think, That's the good news part. And agricultural soils, here we are on a farm, could sequester an additional 1 billion tons of carbon per year, according to the most prominent soil scientist, Ratan Lal at Ohio State University. Wetlands in the U.S. are only 5 to 8% of the total area, but they store 20 to 30% of all the soil carbon, right? And that's greater than the amount that's stored in forests. Who knew? Right? These are just, if we have the information, we can then figure out what to do about it. And finally, ecosystem restoration is now possible in ways we could only dream of a few years back, as we've learned more of how ecosystems function, how they've been damaged, and therefore what the cure might be, how to restore them to their previous functionality. And so, just simply, plants remove and sequester carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It's converted into plant material by photosynthesis, stored as wood in forests. And then bacteria convert dead plant material into soil organic carbon in all of these different soils. And by the way, bacteria are part of biodiversity. We think of bacteria as germs, and a few of them are, and they're really bad for us and for other things, but almost all bacteria are wonderfully beneficial. E.O. Wilson, the famous biologist at Harvard, points out that there are, for every cell in a human body, inside our bodies are 10 bacteria living. So we have 10 times more bacterial cells than human cells. He said, if aliens came in and took one of us and chopped us up and did our DNA analysis, we would be classified as bacteria. How's that for a little humbling, thought? And so other bacteria digest some of this carbon that's in the soils and put it back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. They respire just like you and I do. And the waste product is carbon dioxide. Okay, so building soil carbon requires that carbon additions to the soil exceed the rate at which the bacteria that are chewing on the carbon excrete it back to back. So that's a balance that's important to get right. This just shows the correlation between carbon dioxide increases in the atmosphere, the yellow line, this one right here, which has risen dramatically since the 19th century, and it really starts rising sometime around 2060 or so, 2070. 1960 or 1970. And here it is, we're up here. We actually just breached 415 parts per million this past month. And the jagged line, that's the global average temperature, which is a sort of a funny concept because the only way you can measure it is to measure it everywhere. And so what is done is there are, I think for this, about 7,000 sites around the world are chosen. Logan Airport's one of them. They report the high and low temperature. They take the middle of that, report it, and all of these certified stations do that every day, and you get the average temperature for the day of the planet. And you add those all up and average them, and you get it for the world. Okay? Now, of course, there are places where we don't have thermometers and things like that, but there are ways of trying to deal with that. Okay, so they correlate pretty well. You don't have to be a statistician to say that there's certainly a similarity between when one goes up, the other goes up. And it's pretty clear from the science that as we add more of the gas, the temperatures rise. Now, bear with me. I want to just go through a little bit of this. This is from a very important paper that comes out, research paper that comes out every year. Charlene Leclerc and about 50 other scientists each year put out this report about how much carbon is going into the atmosphere and how much is coming out. And they look at all this data there is, and they put it all together. And so for this one, just look at the amounts. It turns out, see, there's about 850 billion tons of carbon in the atmosphere. There's a huge amount in the oceans. There's a lot in the soils, 2,200 more than, and 600 billion in trees and plants. So more in the atmosphere than in forests and trees, but there's even more in the soils. And then the geological reservoirs, this is kind of a made-up number. Nobody knows for sure, but it's got to be at least this big. And so we could put 10 times as much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as already there. That we could do that. And we'd probably find out new ways to frack something to get more. But if you look at where the emissions are coming from, burning fossil fuels and from cement making and so on, 9.4 billion tons a year. And then from land change, clearing forests and so on, about 1.3. So that adds up to 10.7. So that's what's going into the atmosphere every year. The interesting thing is the increase every year is not 10.7, it's only 4.7. Where do we get all this help? Over here. Land, all the plants on land are sucking up 3 billion, the ocean 2.4. There's 0.6 that we don't know where it's going, but it's probably on the land somewhere, something we just haven't figured out yet. So we put all that together and we're removing 6 of the 10.7, and that's how we end up with the 4.7. So nature has been helping us all along, and we didn't even say please or thank you, right? It's just there. It's doing its job, and it's wonderful. So let's take a look at the role of forests. This is, and I'll focus this just on the Northeast here, New England primarily. And what you can see from this is a forested area. Relatively little of our land is in agriculture, actually. There's a little bit up here. That's potato country up in Aroostook County, Maine. And this is the agriculture along the Connecticut River. And there's some agriculture down here and so on, but there's not a lot of it. It's mostly forested. This is the Adirondack Reserve in Upper New York State. But that's a misleading picture. That's only a picture of treetops. You don't know whether they're big trees or little trees under those. So this is a map put together by the U.S. Forest Service. And it tells how much carbon there is per acre in those trees. And what you see, the thing that draws your eye immediately is this big pink splot up here in Maine. We all know Maine's all forested, right? 40 tons per hectare. All right, so that's just like tons per acre, but just 40. Just call it 40. How about southern New England? This is the largest, most carbon-dense forest area in the whole northeastern United States, all the way down to West Virginia, over to Ohio, everywhere. The only other place that's close to it is the Adirondack Reserve, which is protected from any forest use that cuts down trees or anything in the state constitution since the 1890s. Ours are not protected that way. What percentage of Massachusetts forests are protected by law? Any guesses?
10.
10? 1. 1% is protected by law. Other parts are protected by regulation, but those regulations could be changed at any time. This is happening at the national level right now. We're going and we're cutting down parts of the Tongass National Forest in Alaska because those forests are protected by regulation and not by statute. So we know that it can be done, and we're doing it actually here in Massachusetts. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. So we have, yes.
Why is Maine so low in its total
Good question.
carbon versus?
Excellent question. So why is this, look, all the way across here. Well, let's just see here. There's a big, this was all paper industry, right? For 150 years or more, there's been paper industry here. The economics of cutting trees for paper is you cut them when they're small, because you can't wait. If every year you wait, you get more wood, but you aren't making money. So the average age of trees in Maine is maybe only a half or a third of the age of the trees in this part of New England. And up here, there's a big biomass power plant here, and there's another one over here in Burlington, and so that probably accounts for a lot of that loss there. So, yes?
In that map, is the white areas no data?
No, the white area, well, that's a good question. I think that means it's not forested data. It's just not, there are no forests there. For example, you can see, this is Lake Champlain, for example, right? So that's why that's white. So the white areas are no forest. See, around Boston, there's no, right here, there's not much right here around Boston.
Buildings.
What?
They're buildings.
Yeah, they're buildings. It's urbanized. It's urbanized. Yes?
I'm just curious if the softwood of conifers in the north makes it a difference.
It does. That's a good point. The species composition also makes a difference. And up in Maine, it's the pine tree state, right? But it's really mostly spruces, I think. But anyway, they call them pine trees. Anything that has leaves on it is a pine, needles on it is a pine tree to most people. The density of the wood, if it's softwood like pine or spruce, is only about 2/3 of that of oak and beech and maple and ash and the kind of mixed deciduous forest we have mostly in our part of the country. So it's use and its species, but that would only make it 1/3 less, not 1/3 as much, right? It's really a stunning difference. And this is U.S. Forest Service data, so this isn't some wild-eyed group of environmentalists out there trying to make them look bad or something. This is from the people who like to cut trees. And so there we are. That's us. So this is what our forests look like. Pretty nice. The tallest tree in the entire northeast U.S., north of the Great Smoky Mountains, west all the way to Minnesota, is in Massachusetts. How about that? The world champion sugar maple is in Massachusetts. It's looking a little decrepit right now, to be honest with you, but it is big. It is enormous. And they're both near Charlemont, Massachusetts, in the Mohawk Trail State Forest. There are 100, I think Bob Leverett told me 140. He keeps finding more. So it's somewhere between 145 and 150 white pines that are more than 150 feet tall. right? That's pretty impressive. And the tallest one, I'll show you in a moment, information on that. The other thing is, it is a biodiverse forest. I mean, look at this. You have ferns, you have different species of trees, obviously wild terrain here, but just amazing range of species, fungi, lichens, the little forbs, the little flowering plants down here, enormous variety. And last year, this study came out, which is absolutely stunning. A group of, I think there are about 70 authors on this paper. They looked at 48 sites around the world, forest sites. And one of them happens to be Harvard Forest. So we've got one right here in Massachusetts. It's in this data set. What they found is, for a mixed age, mature, older forest, this is a direct quote here from the authors, Lutz et al., that the largest 1% of trees in these forests comprise 50% of forest biomass worldwide. Let's think what that means. Out of every 100 trees, one of them has half of all the stored carbon in it in a stand of trees, on average. Now, in New England, the number is more like 30%. That goes into the average. Why is it less? Well, our trees are younger than the world average. I mean, we're in our, not second growth, we're in, what, fourth or fifth growth. We've been cutting trees for 400 years in this continent. So these trees have never been, most of them have not been allowed to grow very much. So our trees are younger, and therefore they aren't up to this standard yet completely. But there is some interesting good news here. If we were to allow our New England forests to grow, they would be storing between 2.4 and 4.3 times as much as they are today of the carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere. I think that is a good news story, because that means we could manage our forests differently, and we would have much better outcomes in terms of our carbon capture and storage. It would be a huge benefit.
Does it reach an equilibrium at some point?
It does, but we're nowhere near that. Then I'll say something about that's a good question. I'll come to that in just a moment. It's absolutely the right question to ask. And even the Department of Conservation and Recreation recognizes this. They've done studies, and what do they find? They find if you do even age stand management, so here you're talking about, this is in tons per acre. So you start out at 60, you keep managing it, keeping it all the same age. It eventually grows back over 100 years and gets up to 70. All these others don't really change much. The only one that increases is a no-cut reserve. In other words, letting trees grow. And we're making some fascinating new discoveries about why that happens. So people are going out and measuring these big trees. These are some of the big, tall trees I was talking about in Mohawk Trail State Forest. And here's Bob Leverett, who's a retired engineer who has done an amazing job of measuring this, and then the diameters or circumference and diameters, and then he's using laser ranging to measure the heights, and is able to demonstrate, he's been measuring some of these trees since 1992, that contrary to what everyone seems to believe, these big old trees are still growing, still packing on the carbon. And I just want to share with you some of these findings. I'll do it here just this is for the tallest tree in Massachusetts. It's 176.5 feet tall now, growing about 4 to 6 inches a year in height, and it's putting on girth as well. So we went out and looked at younger trees, younger white pines, and found that over their first 50 years, taking from 0 to year 50, they've accumulated about 0.8 of a ton of carbon. But in the next 50 to 100 years, coming to your point, does it level off? No, it accelerates, 1.16 tons. And how about the next 50 years, from 100 to 150 years? 1.8 tons. It's getting more and more every 50 years. Why isn't it leveling off? Well, because these trees have a life expectancy of 300 or 400 years. They're only, they're just teenagers, right? They're just entering their growth spurt. So they're still in that accelerating phase as they're growing upward, and we don't know how big they'll get, because we don't have any others around here. The oldest tree we found of white pines is about 200 years old now. But we have found yellow birch, that are almost 400 years old. Yellow birch, white birch and gray birch, they don't last 100 years. Gray birch, 30, 40 years maybe. But yellow birch, black birch, same thing, 350-year-old black birches we're finding. And then there are the old spruce groves on Mount Wright-Locke there are some trees there that are pushing 500 years. They just got missed by the settlers. And then the question arises, well, yeah, that's fine for one tree, but what about, a stand of trees? I mean, yeah, that one tree might be it. So we're looking at those stands of trees. And again, for these trees, there are two things we've looked at. One is, how many stems, how many trees are in the stand? You start out at 0, and after 50 years, there may be 40 trees growing in an acre. And after 100 years, it's about 85. So I'm sorry, a number of trees. Sorry, it's 40. And after 100 years, it's down to maybe 45. And then it's at 150 years, it's maybe 40, something in that range. What's happening to the total carbon is it just keeps going up. Right? This is for this whole group of trees on this acre. The 40 trees on this acre that survive to 150 years are now storing something like 155 tons of carbon. And I don't see it leveling off yet, to answer your question. So we're not near even near the inflection point yet where it starts slowing down. We're still on this part. Eventually, it's going to go up here somewhere, and then it's going to level off, and trees will die out, and so on, and that will all take place. But in the meantime, younger trees will grow in as well. So it's really, the potential is enormous. This is why we can get 2 to 4 times as much as we're doing right now, if we let trees grow. We have a paper coming out this week in a journal, and we've actually named this. We talk about afforestation and reforestation. Those are great things to do, but they won't make much difference in terms of carbon for another 75 years because little trees don't store much carbon. But letting trees that are already 75 years old become 150-year-old trees in a 75-year period, those will add a lot of carbon. And we're calling that process proforestation. It's a new term. We'll see if it sticks. So, but there's some twin threats to this in Massachusetts, to achieving this. The Department of Energy Resources has been subsidizing commercial-scale bioenergy, burning wood for making electricity and commercial heat. The state is giving subsidies for cities and towns out in the western part of the state to replace their whatever heating system they have with a wood boiler, right? The law and the regs say they would do it for heat pumps, but they give a fraction for heat pumps that they give to burning wood. So a lot of communities have done this. It's unfortunate. The air pollution from burning wood is really bad at these commercial facilities. The American Lung Association has been opposing it for years. And a new report just came out from the World Health Organization that doubles the number of deaths from air pollution from particulates around the world based on their new studies. So there's a comment process underway right now. I both testified and at a legislative hearing and then for the regulations saying this was really a bad idea and we shouldn't be doing it. I'll say more about that in a moment. And then DCR is really heavily cutting some of the state forests. Only about I think 40% of the state forests are open for forest cutting, but they are cutting and taking out the biggest trees right now. And there's legislation proposed that would change that process. By the way, this was a statement from DCR saying what their desired condition was for this particular lot. I don't happen to think it's very attractive or very ecologically sound. And then here's the big bioplant that's going in Springfield. It's being built, of course, guess where it's being built? In a low-income neighborhood. Just happens that most of the residents are Hispanic and African American. And this is being subsidized by us. It is money that's coming out of our electric bills is going to subsidize this power plant. And it's really very troubling. They claim it's carbon neutral because trees will grow to replace the ones you just cut down and burned. All the science says, wait a minute, it takes a long time for those trees to regrow. There's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It is worse than coal for at least 75 to 100 years before the trees grow back. So this is what a big bioenergy operation looks like in the southeast U.S. Started like ours did, and 10 years ago. And here they are, they make these claims. We take sawdust that's left over from sawmills. They're cutting the big trees into wood that goes into a house building. The sawdust is collected, it's made into wood pellets. Here's the sawdust, the future sawdust. That'll all be ground up and made into pellets, whole trees. And this is what it's doing to the southeast United States. Absolutely devastating to these forests, you can see from these photos.
So you can tell that truck is bound just for sawdust and none of it's going into lumber?
Yep, because we then have drone pictures that fly over this that show all the logs just going into the factory that makes pellets. None of it ever comes back out as logs to go to a lumber yard. It's pretty amazing. There's a film out now called Burned. You may see it advertised. If you want to go be really depressed some evening, go and see it. It's pretty devastating. So we need to protect our forests and soils, and so we can protect our older forests, and commercial scale heating is just a terrible thing to do with it, and there's no need to cut our forest for the things that it's being cut for now. There are plenty of landfills and gravel pits and toxic waste sites and abandoned shopping malls. Have you noticed the shopping malls aren't what they used to be thanks to Amazon? So now there are all these defunct shopping malls that are already paved over. They'd be perfect places for big solar panels and so on. And we need our carbon sequestration, wildlife, biological diversity, and all the rest of it. And so we have to stop subsidizing all this. And the same is true of our wetlands, which we've damaged the most. So there are a lot of animal and plant species threatened, and this is all from this report that just came out, and it just points out the essential nature of this. And the main 5 causes are changes in land use and sea use, direct exploitation of the organisms, that means harvesting, over-harvesting, climate change, pollution, and invasive species. And it calls for protecting 30% of the land when only 1% is protected here. And when we do cut these forests, it brings in lots of invasives, because that's what they thrive on, is open soil, open land. Any of us who have a garden know that that land we just cleared and got all those weeds out of, they're right back there in no time at all. So there's a legislation that would put an end to the subsidies for the burning of wood to make electricity or to make commercial scale heat. It would nullify these DOER proposals. It's called H.853. Representative Provo, who is from up on the North Shore, has 30 co-sponsors. So if you're interested in this, you could let your representative know. And then another act has been filed, H.897, which would increase the amount of land that's protected by regulation from the 1% to 3.3%, which is now protected by regulation, but would make all of it, it'd still only be 5.5% of, less than 5.5% of our total land in Massachusetts. So I think it's something we can afford to do, but there's a big pushback. And if we did all of the lands that are forested and owned by the state and treated them like national parks, it would be 13% of the land area, which is still not exactly a huge amount. And this does not apply to private lands or anything else. People can cut whatever they want on their own lands, but this would protect the public lands. Let me just quote 2 scientists, prominent Massachusetts scientists. E.O. Wilson. How many people have heard of E.O. Wilson? Yeah, he's a pretty famous guy. So he was commenting on this legislation to protect more lands in Massachusetts, and he sent a letter to the people organizing that. Many decades of research have convinced me and many other conservation scientists that we must save at least half of the earth from industrial exploitation if we hope to avoid catastrophic plant and animal extinctions. Protecting our public forest is the single most important action the people of the state can take to preserve our natural heritage. That's pretty strong. The other statement is from another elder statesman of science, George Woodwell, who was one of the first people to make the connection between forests and biological systems and climate change, both the fact that they were helping solve the problem, and also the danger is that if the world warms up, they will store less carbon and release more carbon to the atmosphere. So he's worried about a runaway climate effect if this were to happen. So George said this back, actually this is from a statement he made back in the 1970s. Forests are a big part of the climate equation. Deforestation produces about 20% of total global greenhouse gas emissions. Industrial disturbances in forests exacerbate global warming. Fortunately, North Americans have an outstanding opportunity to aid climate stewardship just by managing and protecting our forests. Pushing our government to action is just one more step you can take right now. These are the senior statesmen. I think, isn't it amazing? George was predicting all this before the climate modeling and all that stuff was even out there. He just knew, and he had done enough research to be able to be on top of it. So, this is what we'd like to have. And this is what we'd like to have. More forests, more biodiversity. So, protect our forests and climate, let our forests grow. That's the message on the forests. So this is a recovering Massachusetts forest where the average age of the trees is 75 years, not like the ones that were over 100 years I showed you before. Nice. It's getting there. It could be like the other ones if we let it grow. Let me just briefly run through wetlands and then agricultural lands. Despite general sense that wetlands are wastelands, that seems to be a common belief. Wetland over there, drain it. And the interesting thing is, when you think about the importance of wetlands storing so much of the carbon, every time it's disturbed, it releases that carbon to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. And we've really done a job on wetlands. So these decisions are always made locally. Right? You want a clam shack on the shore in Maine, you know, fill that wetland and build it there. Or on the Cape, wherever it is. And yet, it's creating a global problem by doing that. And so it's, you know, death by 1,000 cuts. So wetlands store carbon in soils, and this picture I took last year, just a year ago, when I was out in Colorado. We went on a field trip, and this is a fen up at 10,000 feet in the Rockies, and it's a boggy wetland, and they had these coring things. They dug down about 3 feet, and this is. This is what it looks like. I mean, look at that. That is a lot. There's a lot of carbon in that black soil. By the way, it's this time of year, it was freezing cold to the touch because all of this plant material on the top insulates it. So this doesn't break down. The bacterial decay of this is really slow. So this really builds up over time. Every year, some of this plant material dies. Bacteria break it down. The ones that eat it can't eat it nearly as fast as it's being created. So this builds up a lot. So this probably has been accumulating since the end of the last ice age. So they have a lot of, wetlands have a lot of carbon because they have time on their side. It's slow to build up, but it's huge amounts that have built up. This is from a paper that was published last year, and it just shows, here's the whole United States. This is 300 tons of carbon per hectare, which is going to be about 120 tons per acre for the whole US. And this is for, let's see here, this is for us. We have the greatest amount in our wetlands here in the eastern mountainous regions of New England and down the Appalachian of all our wetlands. So that's kind of an interesting finding, and this is the most comprehensive study that's been done. It came out 2.5 years ago. So this is a carbon storing wetland in Massachusetts. This happens to be my wetland. I call it my wetland. Of course, I just hold legal title to it, but it isn't really mine. But it's just an amazing place to watch and be close to. A colleague of mine doing research in the Bay of Fundy and discovered this, which is, by the way, it's a little deceiving, but this is about 10 feet deep soils along the Bay of Fundy. And they did radiocarbon dating and found that the soil at the bottom was 3,000 years old. It had been added 3,000 years ago. So you can see this is a very asymmetric time dimension with wetlands. You know, it takes millennia to build them up, and a bulldozer can take them out in a day. And it's no contest. Another amazing fact is so-called blue carbon, which is ocean carbon or carbon along coastal wetlands. Look at just how much is here. And the brown is the soils and the green are the plants. And unlike forests, where it's the other way around, it's 90% the carbon's in the trees mostly, or more, at least half or more is in the trees. In the wetlands, very little is in the plants, and most of it is accumulated in the soils. This is tropical forests here. A fraction of what's in these wetlands. Agriculture. This is our CSA in Williamstown. It's Caretaker Farm, one of the first founded in the U.S. Taking very good care of these soils, producing vegetables for 200 families, and is still going strong. In 2015, the French government announced a program called the 4 per thousand. That's the symbol, 4, P-O-U-R. That's French for 4, right? Got that? 1,000, meaning 0.4%. If we could add 0.4% to the carbon content of all the soils in the world, it would close the gap between what we put in and what nature takes out. Now, we can't achieve that, but it gives you just a scale factor. And so they've created this initiative called 4 per thousand, which is trying to get more and more people in agriculture to build up carbon in their soils. It improves productivity. It improves water retention. It prevents soil erosion. I mean, it does all kinds of good things. So it's not just one of those things, oh, we've got to give up something to save the climate. No, we get more food. Farmers make more money. Everybody should be better off. Yes?
A clarifying question. Is that gap, is that
Yes.
just with existing agricultural lands? So that basically is it, if we made this change across agriculture throughout the world, this would close the gap?
No, it's actually for all soils. It includes forest. By the way, some forest soils have 50% of the carbon of the whole forest in an older forest is in the soils, not in the trees. So that's pretty impressive too. So this is just saying if you took the whole land area, I mean it doesn't include Antarctica and the Sahara Desert and places like that, but you know anything where plants will grow. If we could increase the soil, typically if it's really doing well, it's maybe 2 or 3%. So we're talking about adding maybe 10% more to that. Doesn't sound like a lot, but obviously we can't do it for the whole world, but it just gives you a sense that soils really are important and they have a big capacity for storing things. Yes?
How do you increase soil carbon?
By the way you farm. And I'll say something about that in just a minute. And there are people here who can say more about it than I can because they're practicing it right now. Another question? Okay. Here's something that I think we've lost sight of, that all life depends upon ecosystems that consist of animals, plants, insects, bacteria, fungi. And yet, when we do traditional modern agriculture, you're either a animal farm or you're a plant farm. And so there's no interaction, there's no ecosystem dynamic here at all. And we know that we're losing pollinators. Without pollinators, there goes some huge fraction, well more than half of all the flowering produce that we eat. Then the thing that gets no respect at all are these soil fungi. Right? Here's a rootlet, a tiny rootlet, and look at the fungi on there. And people look at that and go, oh, ick, right, ick. It's attacking my plants. No, it's feeding your plants. And the discovery that soil isn't just dirt that holds the roots, but it's a living system that's very dynamic is relatively just beginning to dawn on a lot of people. It's been in the minds of a lot of people practicing more sustainable agriculture for a long time, but the mainstream scientific world of the Department of Agriculture has been slow to come to this. They've not been so keen to get onto it. And then the bacterial mix in the soil. I came across one bit of research that said in a teaspoon of healthy soil, there are between 100,000 and 1 million bacteria. The weight of the bacteria in healthy soil of an acre of land is equivalent to the weight of 2 cows that might be grazing on that acre. I mean, these are the kind of things that just sort of boggle your mind, right? And you think, well, wait, where have I been? Well, you know, why didn't anybody tell me about this before? So I'm telling it to you now. And so we need to incorporate all these different species in some way in our agriculture. We held a meeting about a month ago at Tufts University. We brought in farmers from around New England. We brought in people from the various organic farming associations and others, some scientists, soil scientists. And one of the people who was there was a farmer from Westfield, Vermont, which is way up in the Northeast Kingdom. At Butterworks Farm. He's a Tufts graduated in 1971, decided to go become a farmer up in the Northeast Kingdom. So he learned something at Tufts, right? I mean, and he has just the most amazing way of saying things. So I thought I would quote him instead of trying to make this up myself. We need to do everything possible to put the biology back into all agriculture. This has led to increasing our permanent grasslands and reducing grain production. Now, he's been doing organic farming since 1971. He's only been doing what he's calling biological farming about the last 6 or 7 years, and it's made a tremendous difference. So, as he said, even old farmers can learn. Growing crops organically without plowing and herbicides is the new frontier in organic farming. On conventional Vermont dairy farms, this means less continuous corn, more grass, annual cover cropping. As soil biology increases, building up the living part of the soil, the fungi, the bacteria, and so on, is what brings the carbon in and keeps it there. Increases the need for chemical inputs will eventually just decrease. It's just not even worth it anymore. When we think of the billions of dollars, this is a big problem up in Vermont. Lake Champlain is just a disaster with all the agricultural nitrogen and phosphorus runoff. Billions of dollars have been earmarked for Lake Champlain cleanup. These practices seem rather inexpensive and quite doable compared to the massive infrastructure that has been recommended to solve our pollution problems. I mean, the wisdom of this man. He has been there, he's done it, he's discovered it himself, and he is able to live it. And here's just showing your question about how does it happen. Here are the plants and the roots coming down here, and you have these bacteria and fungi in the soils. You have all these other little creatures as well, all kinds of things. Usually when people see bugs, they think it's a terrible thing and they stamp them out, but no, they're there to help, mostly. This slide was put together by John Laurie, who is, I think it's a wonderful slide, and I asked if he could use it, and he said yes. Here's just showing, here are some of these fungi in the soils, and so they actually bring the nutrients, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the magnesium for the chlorophyll, all that is brought by them to the roots of the plants. And the plants, in turn, do feed them some sugars and stuff. So it's a fair exchange. And then you have things like if you do grazing, there's a lot of interest now in different forms of grazing that actually, instead of depleting the soils, actually build up the soils in grasslands, just as, say, the bison did in the Great Plains over the last 10,000 years. And then we took them off the plains and started planting corn, and half that soil is gone now, right? We've done it the other way, and things like dung and so on. Here's a dung beetle helping out, rolling up dung and burying it in the soil. And here's some farmers up in Vermont, young farmers. And how deep does carbon go? Well, this is just showing different kinds of plants. Here are grasses going down maybe 3 feet, beans maybe going down 4 feet, small grains going down more than 4 feet, alfalfa going all the way down to 8 feet. And this is what it actually looks like in cross-section. And you can see how deep does carbon go. Oops, sorry. At least as deep as the roots of the plants. If you look at these cross-section, you can see how the darkness follows the roots down. So there's some kind of biology and chemistry going on between roots and soils that ends up adding carbon to the soils. So out in California, they're now not doing things the way they used to. They're now carbon farming, they call it. I think that's an interesting concept. This is, of course, just composted materials, manure, and so forth. If we're adding soil to New England, this is just showing where we do agriculture in Massachusetts. You can see that there's, here in Middlesex, we're not certainly not the biggest. That's really along the Connecticut River. That's where the biggest farms are, and there's a lot down here in Plymouth County. And if you look at this map, agriculture is this dark brown color. Here it is. There's the potato farming in Aroostook County. There's the agriculture along the Connecticut River, along Lake Champlain, and then there's some agriculture in some parts here. This pinker color is obviously the developed areas. So you have big developed areas here. There's Springfield, Holyoke, and so on. So I'll just wrap up here, just showing a few pictures. Here's this farm up in Vermont where they're doing all this thing. They don't just let the cows eat all the grass. They move them frequently and bring them back only when the grass is regrown enough to be chewed on. And what that does is it just increases the productivity a lot. If any of you read Omnivore's Dilemma, you may remember the chapter in there about Polyface Farm down in Virginia, where the farmer there was able to raise 4 times as many cows per acre as his neighbors were by this rotational grazing method. And it was always, and there were no bare spots. And it becomes integrated with things like chickens and other things. So how do we turn natural lessons into sustainable agricultural practices? Well, what can we learn from nature? And what state policies we need. And we're all here basically to learn from each other. We just have to, it's a lot of trial and error, and there's, there are theories and people have their ideas and they try them out and some work and some don't. And that's okay. We learn from the mistakes as well as from the successes. So I just want to conclude by saying in forests and soils lie the future of the planet. That's where it is. That's going to determine how we're going to do. And here's our sustainable future. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So I want to ask what the current use for forest land, what the regulations are in Massachusetts, because in Vermont, where I own quite a bit of forest land, current use requires you to harvest trees.
Right.
And I get $1 a ton for low-grade trees. $1 a ton.
Yeah, that's not a lot.
It's not worth it for me to cut it at all, except for I'm required to.
Yeah. Well, Massachusetts has a similar law, but it also has an exception to it. The law in Massachusetts, Chapter 61, If you want to put your land into into forestry, you'll get a tax abatement for doing that from your town. So it's on the back of the town that happens, even though it's supposedly benefiting everyone in the state. And then you have to put it in a forestry plan, and that means you have to cut it at some point. And if you don't cut it, then you end up having to pay back fees and all kinds of taxes avoided and everything.
And the forestry plan costs money.
The forestry plan costs money. Now, there's an alternative to that. It's being done in a few states, and is actually, the idea comes from Costa Rica, where they actually pay people to keep their forest standing for the carbon storage. Imagine if we did that. If you had a piece of forest land and you said, okay, we'll do that, and it won't come out of in my ideal world, it would not come out of the taxes of the town. It would be paid, since all the citizens of Massachusetts are benefiting from this least expensive way to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, by far, that it would come out of general revenues, right? Or maybe we do it the way we're subsidizing the burning of wood now, and we put a little fee on our electric bills, and that goes into a pot, and that pays people to keep their forests going. We could figure a lot of ways of doing it. I think that's something that we ought to really seriously consider, because I know a lot of people who are forest owners who say, I don't really want to cut this. On the other hand, I can't afford to pay all the development tax, the taxes if it were developable land, so I got to go into this thing. So we've really, this is such a 19th century concept of what a forest is for, right? It's there to be cut down. And so we're stuck with that, but we can change it. I mean, that's what supposedly democracy is about. We can go and try to convince our legislators to do something different. Yes?
I've just been reading a book about the 1938 hurricane.
Oh, yes, the 1938 hurricane.
About the vast swathe of New England that was completely flattened. And what I hadn't realized is there was a WPA program to bring a whole new lumber industry.
Yes.
Clean up all these trees.
Yes.
So there wouldn't be a fire hazard. But what I was listening to you talk about the importance of older forests, and I was also thinking about the increase in hurricanes and the intensity of those. What is anyone putting these two scenarios together and leading us somewhere?
Yeah, good question. The question is really, it's an observation that, we're having more intense storms. In '38, we had the big hurricane, and that, there's a huge WPA project to go clean it up, right? Can't stand all that mess. And it'll be a fire hazard and everything. Of course, fire hazards in New England are not, this is not California, right? Just let me make that clear. Is the fire hazard, and certainly when we're getting 50% more rain coming down, is not really a problem. But I can understand everybody wanted to get it cleaned up and not let it go to waste. And so there was a big attempt to kind of create a lumber industry of salvaging these trees. Actually, in these older forests, again, there's a large percentage. It varies from essentially 1% to 25% of the stored carbon is in dead trees. Some are lying down, some are still standing, and then there's another 30 or 40% that's in the soils. So the living part is what we pay attention to, but that's only a piece of it. And it's the decomposition of the material, that's the dead material, that actually provides the nutrients for the next generation of trees, right? That's where, now we've depleted all that, so we cannot expect the next generation of trees to be as big as the ones that were there before. Not for a long time. It'll just take longer for them to get that big because we've used up all the nutrients. So are people putting this together? Among forest ecologists, yes. Among foresters, no. I mean, they're like fisheries scientists, right? They can tell you how to catch all the fish, but they can't tell you how the whole ocean works with the fish and the plants and the bacteria and everything. That's what fishery scientists, marine scientists do. And so we have this now divide between forest ecologists and foresters, just like we have the divide between marine ecologists and fisheries scientists. Each has a different purpose, right? The purpose is to catch more fish or cut more trees. You know, that gives you a different set of outcome, and they're the ones in charge of seeing what's happening. The scientists are just talking about it, and measuring it. They're then making the actions happen. So we have a disconnect here, I think. Yes?
So just a comment, you mentioned that there's legislation about forestry, but there's also legislation about healthy soils, if anybody's interested in the bill.
Yes.
But it seems like organizations could get together and, you know, I think the deadline is May 28th or something to submit this. So,
Okay. Do you have the bill number for the Healthy Forest Bill? Well, go ahead and tell them what it is. This is a piece of legislation. I've spoken with some of the legislators about it. It would actually provide some form of incentives to increase carbon uptake in agricultural soils in the Commonwealth.
So the same practices that you talked
Yes.
about. It's S438.
S438 in the Senate.
873. You can look them up online.
Yeah. H873 on the House side.
But my question is, would you compare the forests of New England to tropical forests in carbon storage?
Well, tropical forests store more carbon. First of all, they're more extensive, and the trees grow much faster there because they grow 12 months a year. Actually, though, the potential for additional growth is actually greater in temperate forests because they're so young, right? We've already decimated them. So the potential for them to grow from this point forward is per acre is probably greater than it is for some parts of the tropical forest. And yet we hear all about tropical forests. Actually, a friend of mine who's concerned about our temperate forests says, you don't suppose it's a conspiracy getting us to focus on tropical forests so we can decimate our forests in this country? By the way, do you know which forests in the world are the most disturbed on the whole planet? United States. The southeast United States has the most cut-over, disturbed forest on the whole planet, 3 times greater than in the Amazon. What?
Paper.
It was paper, and now it's bioenergy. And timber. I mean, it was all 3. And that is also the most biodiverse, rich part of North America is the southeast United States. More species of anything you can think of: salamanders, mammals, birds, and it's just all being destroyed for this short-term commercial benefit. Yes?
So for those of us that have an opportunity to plant trees and might be able to have some choice as to species that we would choose, has any research been done as to the relative abilities to sequester carbon depending upon the various tree species?
Yes, yes, it's very different. I mean, for example, white pine grow really fast. They don't store as much carbon, you know, at a given size, but they do grow really fast. The trees that store the most carbon, of course, are the dense ones: oak, ash, maple, beech. How many of those are now diseased? Beech, oak, ash. I mean, it's really troubling. And I wish the state were doing more to try to treat this and prevent it, rather than saying, oh, those trees are going to die anyway, go in and cut them all down, which is the word I just got recently. For those of us in Western Massachusetts, we're feeling a little paranoid out there because there are more schemes to cut down forests in Western Massachusetts, whether it's to put in solar panels or to do bioenergy in Springfield or whatever it is. It just, and yet here's another thing. That whole area, if you've noticed, if you go from New York City up the Connecticut side all the way to Quebec, is an almost continuous corridor of forest land. The Taconic Range Plateau is one of the most bio-rich regions of the Northeast, and it's right in the middle of that corridor. So as global warming happens and species need to migrate north, that's their corridor. And, you know, we shouldn't be chopping it up into little bits and, you know, keep as much of it contiguous as possible. Right.
Like corporations and industry and large-scale agriculture and the military are all like by far the biggest reducers of emissions. Do you think the solutions that you propose can exist alongside the status quo in terms of that and mitigate climate change, or would we also need to see a socioeconomic restructuring alongside the solutions you propose in order for this to actually have the impact that we want it to?
Okay, this is the easiest question of the night. Is it possible to do this alongside of our existing economic system, which is all about making money in the short run? And the destruction that causes. I mean, here's one of the problems: is there's a mismatch between what market timing is and what natural timing is. The time frame of nature is just more methodical and ongoing. I mean, it's been doing pretty well for the last 300 million years with trees. You know, trees were invented 300 million years ago, plus or minus a few. You know, we talk about now, oh, we're going to have all these new technologies, and people are going to make money with some technology that'll suck carbon dioxide out of the air. Well, the amount of energy that takes and how many emissions will be caused by that is just mind-bending to me. But here's a tree doing it for free, and its technology has been tried and tested and Darwinian selected and everything else, and it's still working. So it's a good question. Now, it's interesting to note that there are a number of corporations that are taking this all very seriously and are making some dramatic changes in the way they operate. One of the reasons I'm on some of the boards you heard about is one of them is the climate group actually works with corporations to address climate change. And I'll just give you one example. We have something called RE100. In 2014, we set out to get 100 big multinational corporations to commit to using 100% renewable energy for electricity. We now have almost 160 of them. And if they were a country, they would be the 24th largest electricity consuming country in the world, larger than Poland, right? So that's pretty good. And some of them have already done it. Apple's already done it. And Apple is already doing it for all their suppliers in China, all solar energy, 100%. So that's a good sign. And then the investment industry is beginning to catch on. And for example, there's no more mountaintop removal for coal in West Virginia and Kentucky because no banks will give them loans. That's a powerful lever. If you can't borrow money to do your job, that's destructive. So the question is, can we use the existing mechanisms of the market to shape the market to make it more ecologically sound or sustainable? You know, I'm not sure you can do it 100%, but anything we can do in that direction is a good thing to do. But I think we are going to have some major changes. We just have to think about it differently. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that there are plenty of places where we could put solar.
Yes.
But the owners of most of those places don't have the interest or wherewithal to do it. We have an urgent need for more solar and wind to supply the companies and everybody else. Don't we really need to put solar up in some places that sacrifice some trees? Isn't this more of a public policy question? Until we get the policy right, we still need to add solar because we only have 11 years to cut 45% of our fossil fuels.
It's a good question about are these places available? Look, the places that they're going in the big areas right now, that's not the landowner that's doing that. These are big solar installation companies that are coming in because they're getting big federal money in addition to the huge profits they make. In Massachusetts, for example, you know, if you buy renewable energy for your house, you know, you can do that. It always costs more. Why does it cost more? Because the Commonwealth of Massachusetts guarantees that the people who put that in get paid more than if it were generated by natural gas or something. Right? So they are making tons of money doing this. The landowner is making tons of money because they get paid a lease for 25 years from this company. So it's not you and me who's got to decide to do it. It's for these big mega things. I mean, look at all these financially failed malls we have now in Massachusetts, right? Empty. No more Sears store, no more, you know, I don't know, Stop and Shop or whatever it is. It's all gone. And some of those places are just, some of them have been razed, just knocked down. Some of them are just sitting there empty. I would think those owners would love to have somebody come in and put solar panels all over those buildings and all over those parking lots and get paid for it.
But until they do.
Well, we've got to, I mean, again, this is an economic opportunity for somebody, and some of these companies are very aggressive. The ones that are going in and cutting down forests are going to people who are lower income, land poor often, got to pay my kids' college tuition, come in, take it all, and they then get a payment every year for the next 25 years for that. Wouldn't it be better if they got paid for leaving their trees standing? That would be one way to do it. And let's move those other things. Towns have done a good job. Our landfills around Massachusetts are covered with solar panels now. That's perfect. Abandoned gravel pits. I mean, all kinds of disturbed areas. Out near us, just across the border in Vermont, is an abandoned racehorse track. It is now covered with solar panels. All that broken asphalt, all those, you know, with grass growing up in it, it's all covered with solar panels now. Perfect. Yes?
Is there any kind of movement to change the way we do agriculture in this country? The industrialization of our food production, meat production, anything that grows in the ground, it's just...
Well, I mean, this farm right here is a small example of that, but it's actually happening, you know.
Do you want to? We've got a couple of experts too.
Yeah, if we have experts here who can talk about it on the large scale, I will say this, that basically, I know from the statistics that, you know, organic food purchases are growing 2 or 3 times faster than food purchases as a whole are growing. In other words, the segment is growing faster than the total consumption. And that's been true for, I don't know, 20 years or so. But if there are people here who have real expertise on this, I'd love to hear from them.
I was going to say just a really good book that just came out by David Montgomery, who's a geologist, and his wife is a biologist. They've been a great pair, but Hidden Half of Nature, and then also he just wrote one on agriculture. He's kind of gone into agriculture a little bit, Growing a Revolution, but it's just talking about how biology is coming back into agriculture, and in many ways because we've dropped our organic matter content of our soils across the country so dramatically that we're hitting a breaking point. And so the farmers that are starting to put lower inputs, adding biology, kind of smarter inputs, but putting the biology back into agriculture are actually starting to regenerate the land and higher nutrient density of food. And they're getting to it's kind of a tipping point happening. And there's a number of things that are starting to shift structure-wise to make that possible. But it's a really interesting place to be right now. So
is that happening with animal production? Moving them out of warehouses and onto
Yes, does it happen with animal production as well as crop production?
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's shifting in different ways in different places, but yes, it is happening. And there's some good stuff about it as well. So.
And if, I don't know how many of you noticed this transformation, but remember when we were going to have, was it bovine growth hormone? We were feeding all the cows, shooting up all the cows to make more milk. They discovered that a cow only gave so many gallons of milk. They gave more in those first years, but then they just kind of gave out, as you can well imagine. You wear out the machinery pretty quickly if you speed it up, and you don't see that anymore. And that was a backlash by consumers. I mean, when my grandkids were born, my daughter wouldn't buy anything except organic milk. And I don't know of a single young parent at that time who was buying anything but organic milk. No additives, no p.h.d, no anything.
I think just to add to the point about sort of a movement in agriculture is that similar to what we're talking about in government organizations, regulating forests is maybe perhaps not the best way. definitely support your local farms and understand what the organic label means. Sort of top-down organic label doesn't necessarily mean that there is biology in your farm. Make sure to understand where your food comes from, and that's not necessarily enough to buy organic, although it does help.
In Europe, if you go to Germany or the Netherlands, they call it biologic agriculture, not organic agriculture. And they really are seeing it in that more comprehensive way than just no pesticides kind of thing, right?
The Hidden Life of Trees.
Yes, the book, The Hidden Life of Trees. How many of you have seen this by a German forester?
Yeah.
Yes.
I just think it's fascinating because he's talking about how the mycelium running, it's just the web, like it's
Yes.
the web of the forest, and how it nurtures the groves of trees so that they all produce an even, or they all have the potential to be healthy. Like even if one tree could potentially get most of the nutrients, they disperse it through the mycelium so
Right.
that the entire grove
Yeah.
can be healthy. And I think it's just fascinating science.
No, I mean, this whole, seeing it as a system instead of as a tree, right? I mean, why do street trees in urban areas look so scrawny compared to those in the woods? They don't have any friends or neighbors to hold mycelia with, right? I mean, you can't, it's lonely, it's lonely.
I just wondered what your thoughts were on that, because I've been quoting all these amazing, the way nature works in concert.
Right.
All the insects that are eating the leaf of the tree, and they let off the leaves, let off a gas, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's just fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's,
Is it?
this is all new stuff for the last 20 years, and it takes time for it to work. How many of you have read this year's Pulitzer Prize winning novel, The Overstory? Right?
Yeah.
The Overstory. It is a remarkable book. It's about trees. It's about forests, and it's about people. And it's about people who are trying to save trees, and about people who are not trying to save trees, about the whole commercial thing, about government. And it is a stunning book. I mean, it was a little scary reading it because I got so drawn into it. Every night I'd fall asleep with these characters, and who were last seen sitting 150 feet up in a redwood tree or something. I mean, it's just an incredible story, and so unlikely. I mean, it starts off as, I think it's 6 short stories that are totally disconnected from each other, and then either the characters come together, or physically, or they come together, I don't know, and they come to the same point, I guess you'd say, about forests and trees and things. And it is. I thought it was well deserved. I never thought it would win the Pulitzer Prize, though. It just wasn't what usually wins Pulitzer Prizes. But it's amazing writing. We've not managed to. I don't like to say manage nature, because I think nature manages itself. But we have certainly mismanaged nature in lots of ways, going back to those, to clear cutting the whole place by the middle of the 19th century, and then totally abandoning the reason we did it, which was first for agriculture, for plant agriculture, and then for the merino sheep graze, which only lasted about 30 years, and we cut down huge amounts of western New England for sheep. And then that industry was gone. And so it's so short-sighted, so short-term. So, a few people made a lot of money in a short time, and then that was it. When it comes to, you're raising, an ethical issue about the treatment of animals, and a lot of people have made the shift to be either vegetarian or vegan. But even those have, significant environmental footprints of one sort or another. A colleague of mine has discovered a form of algae that has the perfect amino acid complement in it. And it also has omega-3s. And so his idea is to use this as a supplement for, people who have a rice diet or a corn diet or whatever it is, that they could really get a really good quality diet, no meat at all, right? So this goes beyond veganism, and the water footprint, the carbon footprint, the land footprint is minuscule compared to growing peas and beans and legumes and all those other things, all of which have these agricultural problems we've been talking about here. So, that may be a disruptive technology. I mean, think of all these new synthetic meats that are coming out now.
The Impossible Burger.
The Impossible Burger, yes, things like that. I mean, those could be game changers. They really could come together. Okay, well, I think you've all been very patient. I really appreciate your engagement and participation. And so,
thank you guys.
Go out and do great things. Thank you.
Bye.